live stream is starting. Let's see. More people joining.
Ready? You want to wait any longer, David?
Yeah, let's just give a couple minutes. You know, I don't want to wait too long, but you know, it does seem like people are joining here, so we'll give maybe 2 minutes or so.
It's got to be traffic. Traffic's the issue. Oh, Lucy made it.
Yeah, good morning, everyone.
Hi, Lucy.
Morning, Lucy.
If Lucy made it, that's an indicator.
Right. Gotta get my pen here.
All right, well,
Want to wait a couple minutes till 9:05?
let's see, it's a couple minutes after now.
9:05.
Yeah, I mean, I think we might as well get started. And,
How many other, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. How many other folks are there? I only see 4 up here.
There are 13 of us here. I know folks from Salem aren't going to make it today. That's the only other person I think I've heard from. So,
Okay.
but I'm not sure if others will be joining, but
Well, sure.
rather, I guess, get started. It'll take us a few minutes to go through the
Absolutely.
basic stuff and the intro and all that kind of thing. And
All right.
and of course, if we have to do a roll
9:03.
call on the
9:03.
minutes.
RPC Transportation Advisory Committee, the remote meeting via Zoom conference call. Per the RSA 91-A:2, Roman numeral 3, parentheses B, the RPC chair has declared the COVID-19 outbreak an emergency and has waived the requirement that a quorum be physically present at the meeting. Introduction and Zoom orientation/etiquette. David, take it away. Since
All
you're
right.
the etiquette person.
I think everybody is pretty familiar with how Zoom works now. We have a small enough group here that I think we can afford to be a little bit less formal than if we have a much larger group. So I think if you have a question or a comment, the easiest thing is to wait for the end of the presentation, or if we're having a discussion where there's not a presentation up on the screen, either use the raise hand feature in Zoom, or even just physically raise your hand on your screen, and we'll try to get to you. I'm going to have Amy and Scott sort of keeping an eye on the chat and for raised hands and that sort of thing while I'm talking, and I'll try to do the same thing while Scott's talking, just so that we don't miss anybody's questions or comments. At this point, does anybody have any questions or comments about how things are going to go? We do have to do a roll call vote on any items that we are approving, which is slow, but fortunately we only have the minutes to approve this time. So, and with a small group, that shouldn't take too long.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Tavis will second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Oh, well, here I'll run through the list of folks.
Roll call, sorry.
Let's see, I'm going to go in order of the folks that I have listed on my participants list here. So I'm going to start with Peter Coffin.
Here. I'm going to vote yes. We're not doing the having to announce whether we're here and alone in the room, all that kind of stuff. I will make that statement. I'm here and I'm alone and I'm voting yes.
Okay, how about we do both at the same time?
That's what
So I'll go through the list and everybody can announce that they are present. I'm not much concerned if you're alone in the room or not, and then a yes or no or abstain on the minutes. How's that sound? All right, so first was Peter. We know he's here and he's saying yes on the minutes. Richard McDermott.
I'm here alone and yes.
All right, Tim White.
Tim White, New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. I vote yes.
All right, Chris Cross.
Present, alone, and yes, approve.
All right, Danya. Oh, I'm unmuting you, Danya. Maybe. No, still muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. There you are.
I'm present and I approve.
All right, thank you. Let's see. Oh, mine. People are messing me up. There's people joining. So let's see.
I think I can actually admit them if I pay attention to that and free you up.
Okay.
Or Amy do that.
Lucy St. John, New Hampshire DOT. I abstain, I usually do, so.
Okay. All right. All right. And let's see, Lee Levine.
Hi, I am here, but I am non-voting.
All right, that is true, yes. Stephen Gerardo. You're muted, Stephen.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, I can. Nope. Oh.
Okay, Stephen Gerardo present, and I am alone, and I abstain on the minutes.
Okay.
It's like I got to hold my clicker down.
Huh, okay. For those folks that just joined, we're just kind of doing a combination, announcing who you are and talking about whether you are approving or saying no or abstaining from the minutes. I'm just, and with the new joins, I'm sort of lost track of where I was a little bit. So if I've skipped somebody in the end, please let me know. Rad Nichols.
I'm at home. Nobody's with me, and I approve the minutes.
All right, thank you, Rad. Tavis, did we do you already? No.
Nope. Present, alone, aye.
All right, Tim White, we did. Chris Jacobs, I'm guessing
Yes.
that is.
I'm here in my office, alone at the moment, but anyone could walk in, and I am going to abstain on the minutes. I was not participant.
Okay. All right, I believe that is everybody who is a TAC member. We also have on the line myself from RPC, Scott Vogel from RPC, Amy Warhaft from RPC, and Tim Roach from RPC. So I think that's everybody. Is there anybody that I missed in this? Now's your chance for Zoom fame. So, okay. I think we managed to stumble through that.
Well done.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about that, but it was done. All right. So next on the agenda is the congestion management process. So I guess I will jump right into that. I am going to share my screen here and put up a presentation. Easiest thing again is I'll go through my slides, and if people have questions, if you can try and hold on to them to the end, that's probably the easiest thing for me to try to do, to try to answer them. And then, but if you have something that's, you know, an immediate need to be addressed, just holler out, and we'll try to deal with it. All right. Okay, so. All right, I'm going to run through a slideshow talking about the congestion management process here. Some of this is going to be a bit repetitive of what we talked about at the April meeting, but we've made some pretty substantial progress on the document and on the process itself in the interim. We actually have a draft that was sent out to TAC members with the agenda. And we're looking to move forward with that to start to get some input from outside agencies, from TAC members, from our RPC commissioners, and the general public. But I'm just going to go through what the congestion management process is, and how we're intending to use it, and focus a little bit more this time on sort of the contents of the congestion management process, as opposed to sort of the big picture stuff that maybe we talked about a little bit more in April. So get started. So what is a congestion management process? You know, as we talked about earlier this spring, it's a regional approach for managing congestion. It really sets out some actions and strategies for managing and operating the transportation system and the network. It gets linked into our planning process, becomes part of our long-range transportation plan. It becomes part of what feeds into our system performance report. It helps us identify congested locations for improvement projects and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of different uses for the document and the process. So, and it's, you know, we can either do it as a separate document from our long range plan, or we can integrate it. We've got the process set up as a separate document right now, but the results of it and the sort of the ongoing information that we're getting on sort of a annual basis, that will be incorporated into our system performance report, which will be actually as part of the long range transportation plan itself. Okay, and so what specifically can we use the congestion management process for? Identifying congested locations, of course, helping to determine what the causes of that congestion are, helping develop strategies to mitigate congestion, helping us track how projects that have already been implemented are impacting the levels of congestion in a particular area. And then maybe, most immediately, we're going to start using it for helping to prioritize projects for the TIP and the 10-year plan. And then, additionally, it can be used to provide some data for environmental analyses on products as well. So I set up the document to be sort of have 6 parts to it, starting with the framework, goals, and objectives. And we get into what the geographic area that's included in our transportation network and defining what that is, including what our definition of congestion is, and then establishing what the various performance measures and targets are that we're using, the different types of things we'll be looking at, laying out what our performance monitoring plan is, and then the list of congestion management strategies. And I'm going to kind of go through each part of this throughout the rest of this presentation. So looking at our framework and sort of why we're doing this and what the sort of the baseline information is. If you look, the pinkish red bars, that's the growth in vehicle miles of travel in our region since 1990. And since 1990, we've seen a total of a 40% increase in essentially the amount of traffic and amount of travel that we're seeing in the region. At the same time, our population has only grown about 22% over that same time period, and the amount of capacity on the roadway has only grown by 9%. So we've seen substantial growth in travel without a substantial increase in capacity, which is leading to more congestion. And that's what we see here on this graphic. The same red bars represent that increase in the VMT, 40% increase in the VMT over time. At the same time, however, when we look at what our outlays are for capital improvements, that's just the dashed line here. We've seen over 200% increase in outlays for capital improvement, and a 65% increase in maintenance. And you can see the variation from year to year in these is pretty substantial in both the capital outlays and maintenance outlays. And these are state level numbers. So what that has meant is that what we're seeing is some increasing in total annual delay from congestion in the state and in the region. So just looking at the last few years, 2016 to 2019, which is where we have the best data for in terms of the actual delay and that sort of type of thing. We've seen a 2% increase roughly in population over those 4 years, but we've seen a 24% increase in the estimate of total delay in the region, and per capita delay increasing by 21, almost 22%. So substantially growing traffic congestion over the last few years. Numerically, if we look at just the numbers, it doesn't maybe quite seem so much. It's grown from a per capita delay of about 11.5 hours a year to about 14 hours a year delay in the region. So that sort of forms sort of the background of what we're seeing in the region, and sort of moves us on to sort of what our next piece of this is, which is looking at the sort of the lens in which we're going to look at congestion and how we're going to approach dealing with it. And really, the approach that I'm taking is to look at sort of focusing on 3 ways of managing and dealing with this congestion. First, is looking at how can we avoid congestion, and basically reducing or avoiding the need for travel. And this is through, we can manage those things by supporting sort of mixed use, denser development, being supportive of transit and bike and pedestrian friendly design, and expanding and enhancing our broadband infrastructure, things like that, help to take that approach. Second approach is to look to shift trips from single occupant vehicles to more environmentally friendly modes of travel. So in order to do that, those more environmentally friendly modes are like pedestrian, transit, or high occupancy vehicles. So in order to do that, we need to provide options for how and when people travel. We need to invest further in infrastructure, things like additional transit routes and stops, additional bike lanes and paths. And I see I did that twice, so sidewalks and paths, how those are different from bike lanes and paths, maybe not so much. The other piece of that is really in expanding and enhancing the amount of information available to travelers and incentives so that they can make good routing decisions on timing decisions and method of travel decisions as to how they're getting from place to place. The final piece of this approach is looking at improvements. And so this is looking at how we can optimize our existing infrastructure and improve the energy efficiency of the system. So this is doing things like addressing bottlenecks on the roadway network, optimizing signal systems and controls, but also looking at, supporting, things like electric vehicles, which have a lesser impact on the environment, and things along those lines. So in order to accomplish that, we've set out a number of objectives within the congestion management process. And these are, the intent here is to make them fairly specific objectives with a time frame attached to them. Some of these we are actually doing now, and some of them are goals that we have in terms of future capabilities. So this is directly out of the congestion management process document. And I'm going to just touch on a couple of these real quickly. First is the conduct travel time reliability analysis on state highways in the MPO region, utilizing data from the National Performance Management Research Dataset, NPM-RDS. This is information that we're using now to basically build the congestion management process and the data behind it. But annually, beginning this year, we'll be starting to conduct a sort of a regular analysis. And then the next one of this is really compile the CMP data analysis in an Esri story map for distribution. That is something that we're working on right now. I'll show a little bit of that towards the end of this this presentation, but that's how we're going to be sort of sharing the CMP and its data and its outputs with the public and with the committees, the TAC committee and the policy committee. So we'll be using that, and Christian is in the process of building that right now. It's near done. So some of these others are more aspirational. I think the most aspirational goal here or objective here is probably the establishment of permanent automatic traffic monitoring stations along all high priority interregional tier 1 corridors by 2025. That's probably shooting a little high for 2025. But one of the things we found is that we have good permanent counters on I-95, on I-93, on 101, but there's not one on like Route 125, which is sort of a big gap in our system, and probably on Route 111, sort of the western part of our region could use some as well. So we're looking to try to expand the number of those. There are a couple of projects in the works, improvement projects on 125, where we might be able to have that happen, but nothing has been committed yet. So I'm not going to go through the rest of these and just keep moving on in this, but feel free to ask any questions about those as when we get to the end. When we look at the geographic area that of the congestion management process, it's really we have the option of really of only including the Boston urbanized area in this, but we didn't feel like that was a practical way to manage this in our region. So we've expanded it to include our entire MPO region, which includes the Boston urbanized area, which is sort of this darker, it's the pink at the bottom of the screen, and the sort of dark, slightly darker pink that's in our region, mostly on the western part of our region, but also expands up into Seabrook and Hampton Falls on the eastern part. But also, and then the sort of the brighter pink, maybe purplish pink, I don't know, is that's the Portsmouth urbanized area, which is this, the city of Portsmouth and surrounding communities extends into Kittery and York County in Maine a bit, but also extends down into Northampton and Hampton and out to Exeter and Stratham. And Epping is its own little urban cluster, which we probably will connect with the Boston urbanized area here with the new census. But anyways, we have these two urbanized areas that are in very close proximity and essentially are merging together. So we felt that it makes sense to include our whole region in the congestion management process instead of just a small portion of it. So it's all of our communities, and our analysis to some degree will extend a little bit into surrounding regions in New Hampshire, as well as a little bit into Maine and Massachusetts. When we look at the network, this is just a very rough picture of our network. These are essentially all the numbered state highways in our region are in red or blue. So those are all included in our defined network, with the major roadways being those that are on the national highway system that we have the best information for. That's, like most of Route 1, I-95, Spalding Turnpike, Route 16, 101, Route 125, the western portion of Route 111, Route 28 through Salem, I-93 through Salem, and I think those are the majority of the main national highway system roads in the region, and the rest are the other state highways, all the ones in blue, places like Route 1A along the coast, and 1B, I guess, actually 1B isn't included in that, so 1A, you've got Route 27 over here in Epping and Exeter, Route 108, which parallels 125, and some other roadways all the way through. In addition to those state highways, we are including the coast transit system in this, the MTA or CART system, which is now part of the Manchester Transit Authority. Wildcat Transit to some degree will be included in this, as well as the Port of New Hampshire and the Pan Am Railroad with the accompanying Amtrak service that's on that. So when we're talking about congestion and trying to, part of that is defining and identifying what we mean by that. And really there's sort of two pieces to this. There's of what is considered congestion, and this graphic is straight from the Federal Highway Administration. So you have recurring congestion, which is congestion that occurs sort of regularly. It's generally related to commute movements or not so much events, but it's a sort of a pattern of the congestion occurring day after day or during particular times or days of the week. And this is often related to physical bottlenecks and traffic control devices. And it's simply, more traffic on those roads than the capacity is there to handle them at the time. Then there's also non-recurring congestion, and this is a little bit harder to sort of quantify and identify, but we know we know why it occurs. It's related to crashes and other traffic incidents, work zones where lanes are closed temporarily, or there's construction equipment around, weather events, snowstorms, rainstorms, things like that, fog in some cases that can cause congestion, special events, things like, Seacoast, what's the festival in Hampton, the Lobster
Seafood Festival.
Seafood Festival, thank you, Chris.
Which is
went blank there. Yeah, yes, not a problem this year. Things like air shows where you've got massive number of people, or I know one that's the races that occur in Loudon sometimes create some massive congestion up in the Concord area. So things like that can cause congestion, sort of short-term congestion and for one day off kind of things. And then finally, just fluctuations in normal traffic. you know, everybody's driven around and, you know, there's just this occasional random weirdness that happens and things are congested and you can't quite figure out why. You know, it's somebody slowed down to watch, you know, some animals on the side of the road or something like that, and it creates a you know, accordion effect behind it where things back up, you know, that kind of thing. So all of those types of things happen and contribute to congestion in the region. There's really 4 pieces of congestion that we look at. We look at, you know, the intensity of it, you know, how severe is it at a particular location? How long is it lasting? You know, what's the duration? And, you know, how extensive is it? You know, is it just one area? Is it multiple roadways? Is it roadways and transit systems? You know, we're trying to identify where the problems are occurring and how widespread they are. And then, you know, I think a particular interest in the Seacoast region is the variability. You know, is it, you know, how much variation is there day to day or different times of the year? Here in the Seacoast, we often get massive amount of variation where our summertime congestion is, you know, 50% higher than it is during the winter time, you know, and so that's you know, definitely a very seasonal thing for the coast. So when we're looking at our performance measures and targets, we sort of have to, and how we're sort of measuring congestion and how we're tracking it and trying to determine if we're making any improvements or not. There's different measures that we can use, different metrics. Some of these overlap and are inclusive with the federally mandated performance measures and targets that we have and that we've talked about previously. And mostly those are related to travel time reliability in this case, but there's also some safety performance measures and infrastructure condition performance measures, transit infrastructure performance measures that are all sort of rolled into this to some degree or another. But when we're talking specifically about the congestion management process, we're looking at, you know, how we're measuring capacity and how it's being utilized, how we're measuring delay, how we're measuring travel time reliability, and then the, you know, the sort of other measures. You know, what else do we need to look at? What other pieces of the puzzle do we need to look at to get the best and most complete picture that we can about how congestion is occurring in the region? I'm not going to go through each of these. They're all laid out in the congestion management process with, in most cases, there's a formula associated with each of them so that you can see exactly how we're calculating each of these different pieces. And as I mentioned before, the federal performance measures, these are those performance measures. I'm not going to go through each of these, but the most relevant to the congestion management process are related to the reliability measures at the bottom and the freight movement. But we also will be looking at, again, road safety to some extent, as that does have an impact on that non-recurring congestion in the region. Pavement and bridge condition can also have some impact on that. And to some degree, you know, when we're talking about, you know, potential congestion or utilization of the transit system, you know, the state of good repair stuff for the transit system can also come into play to some degree on that. So when we think about what we're actually going to be doing on a year-to-year basis to look at congestion and do the analysis and sort of the pieces of the puzzle that we're going to be monitoring, it really breaks down into just a handful of things. These are inclusive of varying numbers of amounts of detail and within them, but basically we have our annual traffic count program, which is something that we've been doing for at least the last 20 years, if not longer than that, collecting information at 130 to 140 locations around the region per year. And And that's often, that is, in many cases, we try to collect not only just volumes, but some sort of classification. So for different vehicle types that we're using, especially on the major highways. We'll be integrating in the analysis of travel time data using the National Performance Management Records or Research Database, the NPM RDS, analysis of crash data, again, which is both of these last two, the analysis of the travel time data and the crash data, are items that we're already doing to some degree for addressing our federal performance measures, but we'll be sort of integrating that into the CMP. Looking at transit use and other metrics, I need to, one of the things that I need to do, in the next month or so, as I'm trying to get this draft wrapped up, is really chat with Rad and chat with the folks at MTA to see how we can best utilize transit use and any other measures we might there to integrate that in as best as we can. And then the park and ride utilization. This is something that we've sort of sporadically done over the years, where we look at how full the park and rides are in the region. I know Scott has gone out on several occasions to look at the Portsmouth Park and Ride after snowstorms, or a day or two after snowstorms, to see how many cars are still covered with snow, to sort of get an idea of how many people are using that long-term versus short-term. We've also been chatting with our neighbors in the Boston urbanized area in Massachusetts, and they do a similar sort of program, and so we'll be trying to integrate with them and maybe try to coordinate that monitoring a little bit further than we are now. All right, so outputs from this congestion management process. Really, there's three primary outputs. The first or maybe not the first, but maybe the most critical piece of this is our ArcGIS story map that we're developing. And I will show you a little bit of that here in a minute. This is something we're intending to update at least annually, and that will show interested folks the sort of the regional picture of congestion at the moment, give up-to-date performance metrics and status on that. And then we'll be using that data from that in the project development process and helping us to select priorities for the 10-year plan and the TIP. In addition, another output of this is our system performance report, where the information from the CMP will be fed into that. That's updated every 2 years, as every time we update our transportation improvement program and our long-range transportation plan. And this is one of the ways that we can demonstrate that projects that have been implemented in the region are helping to meet any congestion goals that we might have. And then the final piece of it is, of course, the congestion management process document itself. This really just lays out the big picture piece and the how we're going to do things and the why we're doing them. And this will be updated less frequently, probably every 5 years or so. But the idea is that just it's the process, it's the how we're going to do it, as opposed to the actual doing of it. So the final piece of the congestion management process is the strategies, and we've got broken the strategies in the back, and they're from their own portion of the document. We've broken it up into 7 categories, looking at different aspects of the land use and transportation system that we can help to utilize to manage congestion. And the idea is that we are looking beyond just capacity expansion. And in this case, I think we really need to use roadway capacity expansion as sort of the tool of last resort. Let's see if we can't find ways to deal with this congestion other than just expanding the number of lanes on a road. So we've broken them up into 7 groups. Active transportation, and these are not necessarily in any particular order, but active transportation, this is strategies to promote cycling and walking as alternative to driving. Goods movement, this is different things that can be done to improve the freight network and to reduce congestion and bottlenecks on the freight network. Traveler information incentives. These are strategies that can help to better inform the traveling public and allow them to modify their timing of travel or method of travel or route to reduce congestion. Transit strategies where we can help promote and create the capability of people to get out of their car and make more trips by transit. Community development and design. This is certainly an area where we probably have less ability to directly impact, but if we can help to encourage communities to develop in a more dense manner with a lot more mixed use development, then maybe we can reduce the need for auto travel overall, and that can help reduce congestion on a local basis at least. Roadway capacity expansion. This is sort of the historic method of dealing with congestion. If you're congested, you just add another lane, right? Or you put in a traffic signal, that kind of thing. We've seen over time that doesn't work. It just tends to draw more traffic in. So we want to use that strategically to address bottlenecks in areas where there are substantial problems, as opposed to using it as the default approach. And finally, the system management and operation strategies are looking at system optimization type of things like signal coordination, adaptive signal control, using roundabouts instead of signals in some cases. It's things like that can help with the management and operation of the system that really are sort of lower cost methods of making the most effective and efficient use of the existing capacity on the road. So, and this slide is essentially the same thing as the last slide, but with nice pictures and less text. I think I had intended to use one or the other and then sort of forgot what I was doing.
So we read these on our own?
Yeah, if you want. It's the same as the last one. There's just not the nice text with it. I think I did, like I said, I think I'd intended to use one or the other and not both, but lost track of myself. So in addition to sort of the text descriptions of the congestion management strategies, I've pulled together sort of this table that just really looks at, takes a look at each strategy in each area and looks at what the approach is for that, whether that's a shift or a void or an improved based strategy, the time frame for implementation, whether that's a short term or a medium term or some sort of combination or long term, any of those, the types of costs that are associated with that, whether it's a construction or operations maintenance, enforcement or their public policy costs, those types of things. And then looking at the types of benefits, whether it has impacts for capacity or safety or the efficiency of the system. And even, if there's fuel and emissions reduction capacity or benefits for the project. So just try to get a general idea of where each of these strategies might have the impacts so that when you're evaluating a project and looking at alternatives to how to, or even a location where you're looking at alternatives to try to address congestion, you can see what different types of costs and benefits are likely to occur with a particular approach, and so just help to make those decisions a little bit. So the final slide for this is looking at sort of how we're going to move forward with congestion management plan here and the plan for adoption. So right at this point, we're in June of 2020. I had hoped to have it completed at this point, and we were close. We're not quite there, but we're close. So we've got a draft CMP. We've got the story map, which I'll show you a little bit of here in a minute. That's mostly done as well. I really need to put the document out for comment from our planning partners, all of you, of course, but our state and federal and regional planning partners as well. And then just for general public comment, I'm going to set up a public engagement portal via our publicinput.com service to collect comments and on the document itself, and I'll be working on that starting next week. And then hopefully for next month at the TAC meeting, we can do a much shorter review of this and look at what comments have come in and suggestions and changes might have occurred over the next month here, and get a recommendation from the TAC for the MPO to approve it. The policy committee will meet in August, and we'll be using some of that time in August at the August meeting to try to get the CMP adopted there. Sort of parallel to this, we are certainly monitoring congestion already and keeping track of that data, but we'll be integrating it into the project selection process as well. As that we're going to be in, one of the things I'm going to talk about a little bit later on the agenda is the project solicitation for the 10-year plan and the long-range transportation plan. So that'll be occurring sort of in parallel to all of this. So goal is, in short, bring it to the TAC next month for a recommendation for approval and the policy committee for adoption in August. I am going to end the slideshow here. And I'm just going to show you the story map that Christian has been working on a little bit. We saw this a little bit at the meeting earlier this spring. But this is really an interactive way for us to share the outputs of the congestion management process, so that a person can come in and look at it. They can zoom into their town or their area of interest and look at what's being seen in terms of travel time data and that type of thing. So of course, we talk about some introductory text in this and a lot of the same information that's in the congestion management process document itself, who we are, why we're doing this, what our objectives are, our geographic coverage area, which is just the MPO region with the urbanized areas, and our network, of course. Probably should have just used this to make the presentation a little easier. So there's our roadway network. And then we're talking about how we define congestion, of course, different types of congestion, showing a picture of very not congested Exeter. And then getting into sort of talking about travel time reliability and some of our federal performance measures a little bit. And then I'm going to just sort of skip down through. So here's some understanding of the different travel time measures that we're using. And so now here is, looking at our travel time index. So this is the travel time index is basically the how much longer an average trip will take on a segment of road compared to when you're traveling at the speed limit. And in this case, this is looking at just interstates and Route 101. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit. And you can see that we're seeing, let's see.
Dave, you'll just need to hit the arrow next to the 2016. There's a little arrow to the left of the checkbox.
Oh, there we are. Thank you, Christian.
There you go.
That's Christian Matthews, by the way, helping me out. So you can see this, looking at the data, where I'm going to shut off various years. So we're looking at the 2016 travel time index here, and you can see that if we zoom in here a little bit more on 101, the worst area is along that, let's see, that's the southbound 95 ramp to 101 westbound. I guess that's the I-95 ramp to 101 westbound. So that's where we're seeing the most slowdowns and the longest travel times. Of course, that's a very short distance. So even if your travel time is 75% longer than you might expect, it's only a few seconds in this case. The rest of the interchange is seeing minor to no real congestion with, a travel time index of 1 is, right at the average, of course. So everything is flowing as usual there. But then if we look at, just looking at 2019, on average, we're seeing the ramps aren't so much of an issue, but it's the, although maybe 101 isn't included in this
Yeah,
one.
it looks like there's a filter issue there. Sorry about
Yeah.
that.
All right, so Chris will address that, but we do see that there's an increase in the travel time index on that northbound, access to 95 north from 101, where we're seeing a little heavier congestion there, where the rest of the interchange seems to be flowing fairly well. So we can also, in this case, look at the change from 2016 to 2019. And so we can see that, yes, in fact, that northbound ramp is seeing increased congestion along it, and we might look to investigate why that's occurring and what we might be able to do about it. It's not a huge amount. We're seeing, an increase a little bit, but, in this case. So anyways, it's just some of the types of information that you can look at in here. And I'll just do, and maybe as far as we can go on that. So planning time index, very similar. Planning time index is looking at the worst case scenario. What's the 95th percentile trip? The almost worst kind of trip you can take on a particular road, and how is that showing up on the system? And in this case, we're seeing still not terrible numbers. Well, maybe it's all relative. So if I look at the 2016 again, so in this case, the yellow represents a much higher index. So it's a 50% increase of your travel time over the average. In some cases, the red in this case would be a 13 times. So somewhere in the region is seeing some massive, the worst case scenario is massively longer than what might be regularly seen. In this case, we're seeing travel time index of 5 here on these sections, which means it's taking 5 times longer to get through those in the worst case than it does on an average case. So, and then we can also, again, look at, different years, but also we can look at the change over time. And so what we've seen here is mainline 95 is definitely seeing some problems along there. And it looks like maybe that's the toll booth side of it, that the tolls where people are stopping for the tolls is slowing down. But I can't tell if traffic actually gets separated there or not. Christian, do you know that?
High speed lane.
So, yeah. Well, it's hard to tell.
The gray is the high speed.
Yeah. I'm just wondering if the sensors are fine enough to pick up when people are using the high speed lane versus the toll lane where you have to stop. So, but anyways, we're seeing some increased congestion along there, at least in the worst case scenarios. So something to look at for us again. And, we're continuing to increase the amount of data on this, and, but it's a work in progress, but we're hoping to have it up and really ready to go for sort of public publishing and comment in the very near future. So, okay. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. At this point, I've used quite a bit of time, more than I thought. That tends to be the case with my presentations. And does anybody have any questions or thoughts or inputs that they want to share at this point?
When are they going to stop analyzing everything and implement some sort of strategy to go forward and clean it up?
Well, I think that's going to vary from place to place.
A couple of years down the road?
Well, I think, there are some projects that are underway now that will use this data to help sort of fine tune the approach. And then we'll be using this information to help prioritize projects for the 10-year plan. And DOT will be looking at this information in some cases to prioritize projects and to better understand projects that they've got in their queue already. So it's sort of getting fed into existing projects at this point, but we're going to be using it going forward to try to identify locations where congestion is occurring that might be good candidates for projects. So you're not going to see this sort of immediate, hey, we've identified this area as congestion and then a project appears suddenly. It's going to take some time, just like, you know, through the 10-year plan process, and that does. But we're going to start, basically, we're going to have better information to make these decisions about which projects to approach. So,
Okay.
Dave, this is Bob Landman. You hear me okay?
Yes, I can, Bob.
Hi, sorry I'm late. The refrigerator repair guy showed up right at 10 of 9. Anyway, I'm here. And welcome and hello to everybody from the good old days of Steve Pesci's there, especially. I've got some questions. The park and ride, the famous park and ride at Pease. And I'm glad to hear this, Scott. Thank you very much that you went and looked at the snow piling up on the vehicles. Walter and I, brought that up every year and said, "Gee, these people are really serious. They're staying overnight to work so hard down in Boston. Oh, they're staying a week, Anyway, when are we going to put Easy Pass on the park and ride? It should be there because they shouldn't get a week to park their car and then go to Logan Airport. We're paying for parking for Logan Airport, free parking for Logan. That doesn't work.
I think they're trying to address that, aren't they?
Are they?
David?
Yeah, Bob, that's actually part of the DOT as part of their public-private partnership program. Has a request for proposals out currently to do a long-term lease of the park and ride at Pease and the park and ride up at Exit 9. So the lessee would be responsible for management of the park and ride facility, and the expectation is that that lessee would implement a pricing strategy, which should then, one, generate revenue to support the facility, potentially generate revenue to support connecting transit, and at least as important, have a demand management aspect to it that should reduce that sort of long-term usage.
Okay.
Particularly in talking with Jim Jalbert, he has a sense that there are some people in Portsmouth that are, actually storing cars there.
And
it's
boats.
not just that they've gone to Florida for a couple of weeks.
Yeah. A couple others I've got. The big one is telecommuting. I brought that up every year, one of the years I was on the TAC, and everybody said, well, yeah. Well, right now, this plan is, as far as I can tell, out of date because telecommuting is going to be here to stay. The jobs are not going to go back to the offices because they're having the big thing is that architecturally, the buildings like the Salesforce building in San Francisco, they just built it, tallest tower in San Francisco. It's going to be at 50% capacity. And they can't even fill the building, assuming that they could jam together because it'll take so long in the elevators. You can only take so many people now in a brand new elevator and get to their floor. So you're 6 feet between every worker. The conference rooms can't hold 15 anymore. They can hold 7. And so people are going to work from home. It's better for the companies. They're saving on rental space. And it will definitely impact this plan because it will cut congestion. You look out at Pease now, there's actually some spaces out there, which is unusual. It looked different last time I went by it. So we don't seem to, in this document, have accounted for this. We got to get some numbers happen to the traffic count on, but what has telecommuting done to this area?
Right. Yeah, and going forward, our sort of, this congestion management document that we built right now, that's sort of more of a static document. We'll update that every 5 years or so. But the story map that I was showing you at the end, that's going to be updated at least annually with data. We are getting the travel time data. It's about, I think, a 3-week delay. So we can start looking at April and May data. And I mean, when we first went under lockdown, I looked at the March data, and we saw almost like a 10% decrease, or I should say a 10% increase in travel time during congested, the typical commute hours. So there were a lot fewer cars moving at a lot faster. But I haven't looked at the April and May numbers, but I would expect, yes, we're going to have a slightly different system and congestion problem maybe than we did, than we thought we were going to have.
We can pay for the virus and it didn't cost us anything.
Yeah.
The virus.
Yeah. I mean, it's the day-to-day congestion from commuting might be less of an issue in our region. Not that it's, I think, a huge issue overall. And I don't want to overstate that. I think congestion is this huge unmanageable problem in our region. I think we definitely have congestion on a day-to-day basis on some of the major roads, but I don't think it's unmanageable. I think where we have the bigger impacts, I think, is the tourism-related traffic in the summer, where we do see those 40 or 50% increase in volumes. And so we have this big burst of travel in the summer that we don't see in the winter. And so I think that's where we need to focus some of our efforts. But the story map, the system performance report, those are going to be updated consistently, and those should start to reflect those numbers as we go forward.
Good. Got a couple more. Pease to Manchester travel to support our airport. Have we got that in place now? Where we don't have to go to Logan, we can go to Manchester and use Jalbert or somebody else.
Scott, you're muted.
I'll
let you take that one.
Are you talking about Pease to Manchester transit?
Yes. Yeah. Pease. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was attempted for a number of years, and just did not produce the ridership that was hoped for. I think a big factor in that was between the time when we did a study on the potential for that and when it was ultimately implemented, Southwest went into Logan. And so the enplanements at Manchester Airport dropped by, I want to say, close to 50% over the course of a few years. Because of that, you ceased having some of the incentives for people from Massachusetts to come up here and fly out of Manchester, or for people from the seacoast to go to Manchester instead of to Logan, from a price standpoint on the flights.
Yeah.
And the other factors and the challenge of serving Manchester versus Logan by transit are that you don't have tremendous traffic congestion going across 101 and getting into Manchester, and you don't have the sort of parking prices at Manchester that you have down at Logan.
Yeah.
So there aren't those same disincentives to drive that you see at Logan that help drive the numbers that C&J and Boston Express get.
Interesting. Last two I've got. Amtrak parking, is it adequate? Do we have enough, or are we getting full, the lot's getting full like over in Exeter, that it could take more to improve the transportation there? See, the numbers are pretty decent in Amtrak, but is there a problem with not enough parking?
I think Amtrak has been shut down during COVID, or the Downeaster hasn't been operating during COVID-19. It either is about to restart or may have restarted. Maybe Shelley can add in on that. My understanding is that for the Exeter train station, years ago, the town had gotten a CMAQ grant to expand parking and have an entrance back onto Union Street, a second entrance and exit point. And that got hung up because the owner of the abutting property had previously had a kind of a gentleman's agreement to sell to the town to support that parking expansion. Then This is the Bridges Brothers Movers property, and then that changed hands. The owner wasn't interested to sell. I did hear recently that that property sold, so there may be an opportunity now with a new owner to do something different there, but
don't know.
that's the most recent I've heard on parking expansion in Exeter. I do think also that I think the town is looking again at pricing parking at the lot and along Lincoln Street.
That's good. The last one I've got is HOV. Will the state ever adopt it? Because 93 will always remain a problem. I mean, I'm single. I used to date somebody up there. You get towards Concord around the end of the day, forget it. You know, it's an hour and a half to get to Concord from Northampton. And it's just not worth it. It's one traffic accident and just, it goes down 2 lanes. Forget it. You can go, there's a non-93 road you can parallel. Suddenly it looks very good. If you've got the Israeli map thing of Waze, it'll get you around some of that stuff. But it's a real drag. Is HOV a possibility here?
I would imagine that as part of the Bow Concord project that they'll look at the potential for HOV lanes on 93 there. I know those were assessed as part of the design for the Spalding Turnpike. And I think the conclusion was that due to the nature of the traffic merging on from Route 4, that if they put HOV lanes on the left side, that it would, because of the merge, you know, traffic coming in on the right side from Route 4, traffic having to merge over to the HOV lanes, that the conclusion at the time was that wasn't going to work. I don't know about I-93.
That's all I got. Been a while since I've been involved. I'm back.
Saving up those for years.
Just one interjection based on Bob's question. Bob, I asked David earlier this morning on page 15 where we've got the permanent counter locations.
Mm-hmm.
When the Route 1 corridor was first brought up, the counts back then was 21,000 for Route 1. Right now it was 19,300 in 2019 and 20,006 respectively. So they have gone down somewhat, the Route 1 corridor.
Mm-hmm.
What that means, I don't know. David would know better than I.
Yeah, it's going down in terms of trucks on my road, which is Post Road 151.
Yeah.
That's going way down. Finally, the trucking has realized that, gee, we can go through Easy Pass. Why are we doing this?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And maybe that could be part and parcel.
Yeah.
Good point.
Of course, I got T-boned on Route 1 in April. I got my car destroyed. Thankfully, it was a Volvo. I'm in the suicide lane, made a left turn into a frame shop right there on Washington Road. And the guy smacked me with his Ford Explorer at 55 miles an hour.
Whoa.
And thank goodness it was a Volvo. Every bag in that car went off, and I spun 180 degrees, ended up in the parking lot quicker than I expected to. And I was facing the street. It was like, huh?
Wow.
Yeah. So that was, now I got a newer Volvo. It's a 2016. It barely fits in the garage. They widened the car. So the mirrors, which don't fold, and even if they did fold, you need them to back out. So I'm the only one that can navigate that, getting the car in the garage.
Danya, I saw you had your hand up. Oh, you're muted still. There you are.
Yeah, there I am. Thank you very much. That was a great presentation. I have a question and one comment, and to the gentleman who was commenting regarding the congestion that will likely go away given the increase in telecommuting. The offset of that is, and we've seen it perhaps, I certainly see it here in Rye, is that the more people that are telecommuting, the more they have access to the area during their lunch times, if they take a lunchtime. So what I've seen is that you have more active participation by families. So when you're looking at your management strategies here, congestion management strategies. One of the things I think that will take a higher priority perhaps might be safety during the day, not so much from a congestion and car perspective, but from a safety and pedestrians and folks that are out more frequently than they would be if they were commuting into the city. So that was just a comment. A question I have relates to when you were speaking about the public engagement portal, which I think is great. And again, I assume that's something that you all do normally. I'm new to this team. How might you be maximizing the marketing of, I call it marketing, the public input portal? Will you be sharing that on Patch in the news, the local community news, to really engage with the community? That's my question.
Yeah, that's a great question. First, I think that's a good comment. We definitely, your first comment about the activity during the day. Yeah, we've definitely seen sort of, I think, around the region a lot more sort of biking and walking and just general activity during the day as people are around more. And so that certainly is changing the dynamic a little bit. And certainly, I think, improving the need, or maybe not improving, increasing the need for like pedestrian facilities. And I think we're seeing sort of broader sort of interest and calls for that type of improvement now. And then the public input, yeah, it's publicinput.com is basically, we can create a portal on that. It's essentially a survey site, but it's got some features that we use to, we can like upload documents to it, and sort of you can step people through looking at a document, and they can provide either responses to set questions, or you can ask for open-ended comments. We will have generally promoted that on social media, but yes, you know, it makes sense for us to do a press release to the newspapers and to Patch and places like that to try to get some broader exposure and input. We've had some good luck on social media this summer with a couple of posts sort of getting, you know, we had one post go viral about the census response rates in the region, and we got over 10,000 views on that post on Facebook. And you know, we're hoping to maybe leverage that type of thing. We've connected with all the sort of official and unofficial Facebook pages in all the communities, so we can post up, you know, hey, we've got this new congestion management process document up, and we're looking for input on it. And so we can sort of get a real low level social media presence going, but widespread throughout the region. We've also had good success with advertising through Facebook, and that gets it in front of a lot of people in the region, and it's at a fairly low cost. So those are the types of things we've done in the past to deal with these kinds of things. But you know, marketing is certainly not a strength of mine. So if anybody has thoughts on good ways to market this, you know, it's a learning process for us and an evolving process. So you know, we're happy to take
Dave,
folks' input, and
happy to
go
help.
ahead, Tim.
Perhaps you.
Dave, I can jump in here just for a minute, if that's all right. For those of you I don't know, I'm Tim Roach. I'm the director at RPC. I haven't seen Bob Landon in forever, so nice to see you, Bob. At any rate, we're working on our communication strategy as we over the last several months. We have Amy, who's on this call, as sort of helping us take the lead on that, but trying to develop, you know, better outreach opportunities and taking advantage of these software platforms. I personally think that this particular piece of software and just the remote technology is going to increase public involvement. And I think we could increase it dramatically if we get aggressive with some of the things that Dave suggested in terms of the local Facebook pages. I'll use Stratham as an example where I live. We just had a meeting in May where we had a project in Stratham that was part of an amendment to the Transportation Improvement Program. it was our first foray using this software for a hearing, so we weren't real aggressive in terms of going beyond some of the minimum public notice requirements. We did get people to join in, which was great, and we got some comments, which is a huge. We usually don't, but I really believe if we had put that notice out on Stratum Talks, that we could very well have been overrun, just knowing how important that project is to that community. So yeah, we're pretty excited about it. I think there's opportunity. There is a communication committee with the RPC. So if anyone's interested in being part of the communications committee, happy to draft some members, and especially if you have any experience at all in marketing and outreach, that would be terrific, because a lot of things need some help. Our website and just an overall communications plan would be terrific. So I'll stop and let you guys get back to the transportation talk.
Right. So I see Lee has had his hand up for a while. And then I saw Chris and Peter both as well. So let's start with Lee.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Dave. Just want to say great job to you and Christian for all the work that's gone into this, and I'm looking forward to seeing the draft documents. One item, you mentioned that you wanted to maybe expand your permanent traffic counting network, and I wondered if do you think that that's a kind of a common need for the other MPOs that are also working on developing their CMPs? And if so, maybe that's something to think about discussing with the Partnering for Performance group, or in some way approaching the department, the DOT, with those needs, whatever they may be.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question. I don't honestly know how the other MPOs, what their status is with those permanent counters. I know that we have a big gap. I mean, 125 is a big gap for us. Fortunately, there are 2 different improvement projects on Route 125 that are sort of in the 10-year plan and progressing into the tip to some degree, I think, at this point. And I'm on the advisory committees for both of those, so I will be lobbying directly for implementation of permanent counters as part of those projects. But I mean, there probably needs to be a strategy developed statewide for that. And yeah, we should definitely work with DOT on trying to develop that.
Yeah, I think it'd be a good opportunity, maybe looking into the next SPR UPWP cycle to have that discussion.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Chris.
I had my hand up, huh?
Well, I saw it up. If you don't have a question, that's fine. We can do it.
Holding his head up.
Just a general comment. Great work on the plan so far. As someone who has to write things of this complexity, I'm impressed, blown away. One of my concerns, though, is we get a ton of information from you guys. All good. Is this from a priority perspective, is this the lead guidance document, or should be the lead guidance document for the RPC as far as, traffic and traffic mitigation?
That's I mean, that's a good question. As far, yeah, I mean, I think you're probably going to, you might get more use out of the story map side of it in terms of, being able to monitor congestion, at the beach on a regular basis. But yeah, I mean, it's the congestion management process is intended to be sort of the backbone of the RPC approach to addressing congestion in the region. It's mandatory that any capacity expansion project in an area with a congestion management process be included and incorporated into that somehow. So there is some tie to actual projects to this, and some rules that Federal Highways has put into place to address that. That being said, congestion I don't think is the central issue that this region is facing. So it certainly is a problem, but it's not like the worst thing I think that we're facing at this point. So that's the balance thing is how do we know that it's important, we need to address these things, but is it, is this more important than addressing the resiliency issues that we're facing along the coast, or the lack of access to transit through much of our region, that kind of thing. So we have to sort of balance those.
Okay, that's good. My other comments, I'm just going to put in writing and send along so you guys can digest them at your later. Thank you.
I'm going to go. Lee, did you have a response to Chris's question as well? You're muted, Lee. Oh, there you are.
Yeah, no, I don't think I do.
Okay, I saw your hand go up. So, all right.
Oh, I'm sorry.
All right.
That was to take it down now, right?
Messing me up there, Lee. All right, Peter, you had a question.
I did. You said there's no permanent traffic counters on 125. Are there temporary ones that you can link into? Because I've been on the northern section of 125 and seen the electronic billboards for travel time via 4 and 101 to Route 95. And I was wondering that must incorporate some kind of traffic counting system or delay counting system to be able to feed into those billboards with the travel times.
Yeah, the State Traffic Monitoring Center actually can get access to sort of real-time travel time data. So that's where those travel times come from. If they're not tied directly to what the speed limit is, they're coming from that system. But yeah, we when we do our annual count program, we set out temporary counters along 125 to collect the data there. Theoretically, some of the traffic signals along that route can also collect volumes, but I don't know if any of them are actually set up to do that or not. So, we're sort of piecemealing it now, but ideally, we would have some permanent counters, as that's next to Route 101 and the interstates. It's probably the most heavily traveled through road in our region, and so it's really just a big gap for us in our counting system. And in some cases, the volumes are getting high enough that it's dangerous to be placing those temporary counters out on the road without a police escort. We've had to go to that in several towns where we've used police escorts to put the counters out, and that gets time consuming and expensive, and so it's the kind of thing we're trying to avoid. So, all right.
And the other question I had was the North Kingston to Epping section that you said was due for a study. And I was wondering if you were aware of the big truck facility going in or proposed for North Kingston at SLS.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. Been on some of the email chains and some of the discussions about that project as that's gone through review at the state level. So yeah, I'm aware of that. That will certainly have an impact on truck traffic on 125 if that gets approved. So.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Spent a lot longer on this than I had anticipated. From my half an hour, I think, that's mostly my fault, I think, for taking a lot longer with the presentation.
It's good information. It was well presented, so it warranted, I think, the time that we spent.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Good point, Chris.
Okay. All right. So,
so
next
Dave,
on the agenda.
What can we ask Dave what that bottle of wine is behind his left shoulder? I mean, I'm just dying to know whether that's a Merlot or
No, not a Merlot.
No, it's actually Scott's picture.
We've got that.
It's
God, where's
it's
yours?
lava picture.
Where's yours, Scott?
I thought that was a plant. Thank you.
Sequoia Grove. Sequoia Grove.
So, yeah. So, okay. So, Now let's let Scott talk about the Commute Smart Seacoast takeover. Takeover sounds a little harsh, but I think that's
Friendly takeover, not a hostile
friendly.
takeover.
It's not a hostile takeover, I guess. All right.
Relinquish your gavel.
All right. So Scott, can you share the screen?
Yeah, I should be able to.
All right.
Let's see.
Well, just want to make sure that you're set up to do that. So do your thing.
All right, you able to see my screen?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Let's see if I can get this to the actual, there we go.
Nope.
So
you're showing the
oh,
presenter view.
Right. Not sure how I switch this.
I don't remember either.
Okay, hold on just a sec. Let's exit that. Wow. We'll just do it like this.
Okay.
Okay.
So we wanted to give you an update on planning that we've been doing with Stratford Regional Planning Commission and Coast to ensure the continuation of the Commute Smart Seacoast program. I think it's been several years since we had Ann Rugg from Commute Smart Seacoast in to talk about Commute Smart. So some of the TAC members likely aren't familiar with this. The timing is actually pretty good, and I hadn't thought about it, but following Dave's presentation on the congestion management process, this gives you a view of one of the, well, of the behavior side of congestion management strategies along the lines of some of what Bob Landman was talking about. But Commute Smart is what's called a Transportation Management Association, or a TMA. And TMAs work with employers, usually major, large employers, to encourage employees to get to work by means other than driving alone. And in some states, trip reduction programs like this are actually mandated. Massachusetts is one of those states. Other larger states that have more serious congestion problems than we do. Quite a few of them have adopted these sorts of requirements for major employers to have either an internal trip reduction program or to join a TMA to achieve that result. In New Hampshire here, they're purely voluntary. There have been a number of these piloted around the state over the last decade and a half, including in the Concord area, out in the Keene and Monadnock area, up in the Upper Valley, here in the Seacoast. And then in the past 18 months or so, all 9 of the RPCs have been working together with Central New Hampshire Planning Commission as the lead to develop a statewide trip reduction program called Commute Smart New Hampshire that I'll talk a little bit about in a few minutes. But Commute Smart Seacoast was established originally as a mitigation measure for the Newington, Dover, Little Bay Bridges, Spalding Turnpike widening project with the goal of reducing traffic congestion on the turnpike and on connecting roads during construction for that project. It has been managed by Coast. It has actually won national awards for its effectiveness in reducing trip volume based on the size of this urban area. So the hitch is that the mitigation funding, the pilot funding for the program that came through the Little Bay Bridges project ends at the end of this month with the wrap up of the Spalding Turnpike widening construction project. So the question is, how do we sustain this and how can we expand it? So let me just say a little more about transportation management associations. Typically, they offer a range of services to employers and employees. They'll offer ride matching. So if somebody is interested in potentially joining a carpool, They can put their information into a computer program that can match them up with another commuter with a similar commute pattern. Usually there'll be on-site assistance to employers and employees. Incentives for alternative commutes. Those in some cases are cash incentives or prizes. In some cases, it's working with employers to set up a subsidized transit pass program, or to take advantage of federal tax incentives for commuting by transit or by van pool. Typically, they'll have what's called a guaranteed ride home program, where if you take transit or take a carpool and need to, say, get home in the middle of the day because kiddo's at school and has gotten sick, you can take a taxi home. And that's actually a program that Commute Smart Seacoast has. In larger urban areas with denser transit networks, oftentimes they'll operate last mile transit shuttles to get somebody from a transit station to their employment center. And then a final strategy is commuter challenges. And that has really been the focus of Commute Smart Seacoast here. So back 15 years ago, a company that runs a lot of the TMAs down in the Boston area was hired by Peace Development Authority to try to start a TMA at Pease. And they weren't very successful with it. They were accustomed to operating in the environment in Massachusetts where employers were mandated to have these trip reduction programs, and accustomed to operating in an environment where you have the MBTA with 15-minute service and very, very dense bus networks. And they sort of threw up their hands and said, oh, we can't do this here. But as part of Commute Smart Seacoast, they've really focused on the concept of gamification. And the idea here is that to get people to try something different, to try a different way of commuting, turn it into a challenge and turn it into a game that people can play and win. And so there are 3 separate challenges throughout the year that Commute Smart Seacoast runs. There's a big one that's a corporate challenge in May every year, runs the full month of May, and engages employers of all sizes in the Seacoast to see who can have the most employees avoid the highest number of auto trips, or reduce their drive alone auto trips to the highest degree. There's a separate one typically that runs in the summer that's an individual challenge called the Dump the Pump Challenge, and then one in the winter called Conquer the Cold. For each of these, there's a trip logger where participants go in and log all of their avoided auto trips, whether that is a trip by transit, by carpool, by van pool, by walking or bicycling, or by telecommuting, to the point that Bob Landman brought up earlier. And so it gives instant feedback on which company or which individual is ahead, who has the highest number of avoided auto trips, and also calculates avoided auto miles, avoided emissions of carbon dioxide, and avoided travel costs. So a lot of the behavior change piece of this is encouraging competition among employers and employees at different companies. And so over time for these challenges, there are kind of rivalries that have developed among companies in the area. Between the National Visa Center and Lonza at Pease, there's always been a competition. Between RPC and SRPC, there's always been a competition. These are folks from Loftware and Heinemann, 2 employers in Portsmouth that have had sort of an ongoing challenge. Employees will challenge each other via social media to, kind of some social media trash talk to get folks worked up and intent to log more trips. There are prizes that go to participants. Everybody who participates has gotten a Dunkin' Donuts coffee gift card, for example, or balloons or other sorts of incentives. And then sometimes weekly drawings, sometimes drawings just over the course of the challenge. And then there's an award ceremony at the end. And so in some respects, this sounds kind of fluffy, but it yields pretty impressive results when you look at the stats for the impact. So the 2019 Business to Business Challenge involved 55 companies, including some of the larger employers in the Seacoast. The shipyard participates. Lonza, Long-Term Care Partners is a fairly large employer at Pease, the Visa Center and the Passport Center. City of Portsmouth actually has competition among different departments within city government. Portsmouth High School and Portsmouth Middle School compete. But so 55 companies, a little over 1,000 participants, a little over 7,000 avoided auto trips, 176,000 avoided auto miles, 81 tons of avoided CO2 emissions, and over $120,000 in commuting costs avoided by taking alternatives. So to Bob's point about telecommuting earlier, we can look at the results from the 2020 B2B challenge for a comparison. So had a lower number of participants, about 40% fewer participants, because there were a number of companies that just decided not to participate this year. In some cases, they felt that in the middle of a pandemic, this was having a fun event was sort of the wrong note, perhaps, and they didn't want to participate in that. I think other companies felt that having some aspect of normalcy continue was a good thing, and that it was good for morale to participate and continue participating this year. But for this year, fewer participants, fewer teams, many more miles avoided. 94% of the trips this year were telecommuting trips. 147 tons of CO2 saved, over $200,000 of commuting expenses saved. Wow. 75% more avoided auto miles. In prior years, they've done surveys to see how many people that participate in May then continue after the challenge. And they found, I think the number they found is about 35% of the participants will continue using those alternative modes that they tried during the challenge. As an example, Christian in our office and I started telecommuting as part of the challenge, or not telecommuting, started carpooling as part of the challenge, and continued that for a good chunk of this winter before the stay-at-home orders started. Somebody had their hand up?
Scott, what's involved with the dollars?
I think that the dollars calculated are probably based on the AAA cost per mile to operate a vehicle of probably, I haven't looked at the number this year, but I'm guessing that's in the neighborhood of 55 cents a mile.
That's correct, Scott. That's how she calculates it.
Okay. Thanks, Red.
With regard to telework and behavior change that sustains after an event, I think that Bob is right that with companies, so many companies having been forced to accept telework during the stay-at-home period with COVID-19, I suspect that a lot of companies will continue that, whether as a full-time thing or at least providing greater flexibility to employees to do it part-time. That, you know, it's been sort of a forced experiment in the effectiveness of telework, and I think most companies have found it to be a very effective one. So I noted that there's a statewide effort of the 9 RPCs to develop a statewide TMA, and that has drawn a lot on Commute Smart Seacoast. And in fact, they took the name from it, Commute Smart New Hampshire. The funding for this has been some of the final funding through the Community Technical Assistance Program, or CTAP, that was mitigation funding associated with I-93, sort of the last gasp of that. And then some funding from the Office of Strategic Initiatives. I think that some of the RPCs are also able to use some UPWP funding for this. But it's always been a bit of a challenge for us and for Stratford, working on both Commute Smart Seacoast and Commute Smart New Hampshire, because in order to avoid confusion over the challenges, there's been a statewide challenge in June, but that comes immediately on the heels of the regional challenge in May. And so it's been difficult to get companies who just put a lot of effort into encouraging people to participate in the regional B2B challenge in May to turn around and then do another challenge in June, and some confusion over which is which and how does this work. Similar to the Conquer the Cold challenge that Commute Smart Seacoast does in the winter, for the statewide organization, we've done an individual challenge in October called the Buses, Bikes, and Brooms Halloween Commuter Challenge that usually just, I think it ran 2 weeks last year. But so one of the opportunities we see is trying to more closely integrate Commute Smart Seacoast with Commute Smart New Hampshire. So in terms of how this will work, with the original pilot funding ending, the other complication isn't just that the funding is going away, but that Ann Rugg, who has been the manager for Commute Smart Seacoast, is retiring. And she has been really been incredibly effective in developing this program, has brought just tremendous energy and creativity to it, and the sense of fun that you get from looking at those pictures earlier, that I think has had a lot to do with the success in getting individuals and companies to participate. So the plan is that Coast and RPC and Stratford Regional Planning Commission would work on this, with RPC and SRPC primarily doing the outreach and management. It looks like we'll be able to use the funding that we get through Commute Smart New Hampshire to work on this transition and to sustain Commute Smart Seacoast. We're also looking, or Coast is looking into the potential to continue to use some remaining CMAQ money that was in the budget for Commute Smart Seacoast, to see if that can be used. The remainder of those funds can be used for an interim period. The long-term goal is to get back to having CMAQ funding to support a standalone organization. Congestion mitigation air quality funding, or CMAQ funding, can be used for transportation demand management marketing on an ongoing basis. It doesn't have the same time limitation that it does when you use CMAQ for transit service. So the goal is for the two RPCs to be involved with this significantly for probably 24 months until we can hopefully secure CMAQ funding in the next competitive round of CMAQ funds. And as part of this, also to integrate the regional work and the Seacoast with the statewide work. So Shana Sylvia from Stratford and I have been meeting with Ann Rugg to debrief her, understand all of her processes, She's doing intros for us with the team captains and HR contacts at each of the companies that have participated to date. We're figuring out how to balance off the workload because there are 4 or 5 times as many companies in Rockingham County that have participated in this as there are in Stratford County. And we will likely divide that up such that Stratford becomes the contact for some of those employers in the RPC region. One of the opportunities to integrate is that the trip logger for the challenges that Anne has developed for the Seacoast is actually kind of a more elegant, easily understood, better app than what has been used for Commute Smart New Hampshire. And so the intention is to modify that trip logger app that has been used for Commute Smart Seacoast, and also integrate the challenges, do a single statewide challenge, likely with the Commute Smart Seacoast B2B naming. And in the Seacoast, that would be branded Commute Smart Seacoast. For the rest of the state, it would be branded Commute Smart New Hampshire. But it would eliminate the confusion and hassle of 2 separate challenges, one right after another. Also looking to identify a long-term solution for ride matching software. The state has had a contract with a company called TripSpark that has a ride matching software called Ride Pro. And I think when this started, I want to say that Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine were all working with this vendor. Subsequently, Vermont and Maine have moved on and are working with a different vendor. I think that contract ends September 30th, although I recently heard that there will continue to be access to the software into next spring. There just won't be updating and maintenance. And Shelley may want to say something more about that. But so the goal is, though, that we will focus our efforts on maintaining the Conquer the Cold challenge and maintaining the spring B2B challenge. We just won't have the level of staff time to be going out and doing as much one-on-one contact and on-site meetings as Ann Rugg was doing. But we want to try to keep the momentum going with the program over the next 2 years until we can hopefully secure long-term funding and spin it off again as an independent entity. So that's the summary. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Nice job. David, since there's no other questions, do you want to move on to number 5?
Yes.
Long-range plans. And your time is very, very short in this one.
Yeah, I'm going to
Overstayed your time before.
Yes, I abused my time with the first one, and I will pay for that with a very short presentation this time. So I'm going to share my screen again. I am going to very quickly go through part of this presentation on the project solicitation and prioritization process. This is a preview. This is parts of this are still in the works on the statewide level. Parts of it are still in the works at the regional level. So really next month we'll dig into this with a little bit more detail, or probably a lot more detail, and sort of get things rolling. All right, so first thing I'm going to talk about is just the timeline here. So our plan right now is to solicit for projects for the long range plan and the 10-year plan this summer, primarily in July and August. And at that same time, we'll be working on developing information about existing projects and classifying them into various categories. I'll be bringing a project selection process to the TAC next month for sort of a general approval on that and how that will work. Same thing with a process for weighting the project selection criteria. And then we'll be at the August meeting of the policy committee, we'll be sort of making approvals or setting the okay on both of those. And then this fall, of course, we'll be in discussion with DOT talking about how this is all going to work. We'll be developing our draft priority projects, where those will come ideally, and this is all ideal right now, to the September meeting of the TAC with a short list of priorities that we can then finalize at the October policy committee meeting, and send to DOT for the December deadline that they have to enable those projects to go through engineering review. And then in the spring, after DOT has done their engineering review in March and April of next year, we'll go through a finalization process where we decide exactly what our priorities are based on the feedback that we get from DOT. And we have to have a list of projects to DOT in early May or maybe late April next year. And again, we haven't received the final guidance on a lot of this, so this is expectations based on current and ongoing discussions and where things have happened in the past. So we're likely needing to have our candidate projects to DOT for review at the beginning of December. And then we probably May 1st for the finalized list. And of course, this is all based on, past timeframes, as well as the fact that DOT is required by law to produce a draft of the 10-year plan by July 1st of next year. So this is the next 10-year plan. This is not the one that is still in the legislature looking for approval. This is the 2021 to 2030 10-year plan, I think. So we are starting the process. So a little bit of an overview here. In New Hampshire, you've seen a very similar graphic to this before. There's really three planning documents. There's the MPO Long Range Transportation Plan, which is a 20+ year document. We have the state 10-year plan, which is sort of independent process run by the state, but it sits within that, and that occupies the first 10 years of our long range plan. And then within that, the first 4 years of the 10-year plan and the first 4 years of our long range plan is the TIP. And those are the projects that are sort of immediate implementation. They're the ones that are in active design and in construction in the next few years. This is just some general information about how they differ and how they are the same. The TIP and the 10-year plan are updated every 2 years on a cycle, whereas the long-range transportation plan is really updated. We are required to update every 4 to 5 years, depending on whether we're in conformity for air quality purposes or not. Right now, it's a 5-year update cycle, but we do interim updates with the TIP update just to keep things consistent, keep our project lists and timing consistent, but we don't go through and do a major overhaul of the long range plan except every 5 years. TIP in this case is the Transportation Improvement Program. So for those of you that are still learning this, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here given the limited time that I have, so I'll just move on to that. So the 10-year plan and the TIP are sort of on the same cycle, and this is a 2-year cycle. Starts in really in odd years. The cycle has been disrupted a little bit in recent years as we've shifted parts of it around a little bit. But so if you ignore this sort of odd year, even year piece of this, we're at stage 1 right now, which is the 10-year plan project identification and prioritization. And that will happen this summer and this fall. DOT's project review occurs over the winter. And then, we can actually come back at the end of that and finalize our project selections for the 10-year plan. And that happens, the spring and into the summer. And then in the fall of next year, there are GASSET hearings. And that's where we have 4 or 5 public hearings around the region. There are 20-ish around the state where the state takes input on the draft plan that they put together. Then it goes from the DOT to the governor, who looks at it and potentially amends the 10-year plan. Then goes from there to the legislature, who looks at and potentially amends the 10-year plan. And it gets through that process and then sent back to the governor for final approval once it's gone through the legislature. The current 10-year plan is currently stuck in the House right at the moment. It's past the Senate, but it is stuck on the House floor. And so once that gets approved by the House, then the governor signs it into law. And that usually happens in the summertime. And at that point, we start development of the TIP, and the combination of all the TIPs in the state is the STIP. So the state TIP is the combination of the transportation improvement programs for each of the regions. So once the governor signs the 10-year plan, we start our TIP development process, which is taking those first 4 years of the 10-year plan, deriving what are the federal and regionally significant projects, and placing them into a document and doing all the associated work with that. And so that takes a good chunk of time as well. And that takes us to the end, through the end of the process, which we adopt, next year, next April, we'll be sort of hitting that process with the current cycle. But so what has happened in recent years is kind of 8, 9, and 10, and 1 and 2 are kind of overlapping now, instead of being cyclical. So we're sort of accomplishing both things at once here, where we're developing our TIP document off the most recently approved 10-year plan, while at the same time developing our priorities for the next 10-year plan. So, I've kind of gone into this a little bit. Given our time, I'm not going to get into much detail here now, but we are involved in different aspects of the 10-year plan process, and over time. Here's the guidance that I'm expecting from DOT on the 10-year plan. I expect it to be very similar to the last round. We'll be adding projects to the last 2 years of the 10-year plan. Our target funding for the region is probably going to be about the same at about $6.6 million. Probably be exactly the same, given that the amount of funding they've dedicated to regional planning commission priorities is exactly the same. We need to include inflation and indirect charges into our cost estimates. We will have a common set of project selection criteria, and I'll talk about those very briefly in a minute. We have to go through that engineering and cost review that I mentioned prior to being added to the 10-year plan, and that can be done either by DOT, or you can have hire your own consultant engineers to do that. And DOT committed last round, and I expect that we'll see this round, that they'll add our priorities as presented. So whatever priorities we present to them within our within our budget target, they'll add to the to the 10-year plan as presented. That being said, all those projects still need to go through the GASSET process, and which is inherently a political process and involves amendments and changes. And so you can't do, there is a potential project to get removed at that point or adjusted otherwise. So what we do in this interim in terms of developing these priorities, we do a few things. First, we go through our existing project lists and double check to make sure that we want to keep the projects in the long range plan. And then we go through and make sure that our data on each of our projects is as up to date as possible, and check and update cost estimates and scopes and that kind of thing. And then we classify projects. We basically look at each project and say, is this a good fit for the 10-year plan? Should it be part of one of the programmatics? Is it something the town should try to accomplish on their own because it's a very small scale project, very better to be done with local funds or state funds or something like that. So, you know, we look at the types of things like that. And then we bring things through the project selection process. So we look at whether it's a feasible project, you know, is it clearly defined? Do we have a cost estimate? Is the project supported at the local level? Is there, you know, has the town demonstrated some support or the region demonstrated some support for project? And then we also look, is it eligible for federal funding? We do have some projects proposed that aren't eligible for federal funding for a variety of reasons. And so we have to pull them out of contention. And then we apply the project selection criteria. Oh, I did not realize this. So right now, what's happening statewide is we're working with the other planning commissions and DOT to update the project selection criteria. We have a slightly adjusted process and a more sort of well-crafted process than we've had in previous years statewide, that will have sort of the same information going out to everybody. How we apply it might be slightly different, but everybody's getting the same starting point. There are new criteria, and I apologize for, I didn't realize that this had, you know, the animations with it, that we're adding criteria addressing economic development and equity, environmental justice, and accessibility. Environmental justice and equity are concepts that are related to making sure that underserved communities and populations are not being disproportionately impacted by projects, or receiving disproportionate or not getting the benefits of projects as well, I guess is how to say that. So those are the kind of things we'll look at for that. We need to go through as the TAC and update our criteria weights and methodology, and we'll be working on that. And like last round, I expect that we won't be applying to the projects, all the criteria to the projects in the same way. We'll be classifying projects based on their scale. We'll look at local scale projects, as well as sort of regional scale projects and then interregional scale projects, to try to get some differentiation and break up amongst the different types. And then we also, of course, have our opportunity to adjust how we handle assessing sort of local and regional support for projects. So, so here are the draft project selection criteria. I will, we're, like I said, we're still in the process of finalizing these at the state level, so I'm not going to send anything out to the TAC yet. But carrying over from previous rounds, we're looking at safety and mobility issues, network significance, you know, how important is the various parts of the roadway or the transportation system. State of repair is also continued to be used. Alternative modes, I should have pulled that out. That's being rolled into the equity, environmental justice, and accessibility column. Resiliency, we added that last round. That's looking at natural hazards and hazard mitigation options. And new is looking at economic development and this equity, environmental justice, and accessibility piece. Regional support is also continuing from last round. So my proposal, and I'll be pulling this together, is to, again, look at projects and weigh and basically use the criteria in 3 groups, looking at local projects, regional projects, and interregional projects, because different aspects of those criteria are more or less important at each level. For instance, at the local level, it's more about accessibility and safety, where you're more likely to see projects like a bike project or a pedestrian improvement, that type of thing. Whereas at an interregional level, so the very biggest projects, and looking, those are more likely to be on our major highways, you know, Interstate 95 or 93, something like that. They're likely to involve allowing traffic to move faster as opposed to facilitating access for bikes and pedestrians, that type of thing. So we focus more on the mobility on the larger scale projects and more on the accessibility on the lower local scale projects, and we weight the criteria accordingly. Some of the other criteria are sort of equally important across the board, but we go through a process, and I'll be setting up another public input survey essentially to help and to get TAC input on how to weight each of these criteria and what's most important at each level. And for those of you that were around last time, it'll be very similar to that, the one we did last 2 years ago. So, and then I'm going to suggest that we look at the top priorities from each list to be considered as regional priorities, and once we've established those lists, and then try to pick at least one project from each category to be included in what we present to the state. That being said, some of our top priorities are likely to be expensive projects that are well beyond the $6.6 million of our target, and it may be a challenge to try to accomplish that, but that's our goal, at least starting out. I think, given that it is after 11 now, I think I'll stop there. I'll be pulling together more information over the next couple of weeks, and at the state level, we're supposed to be finalizing these project selection criteria over the next couple of weeks as well. And so what I'll plan to do then, I think, is I'm going to actually stop sharing my screen, is get information out to TAC members as soon as possible for the July meeting. And part of that will include a survey that you can fill out to sort of help look at the project selection criteria and prioritize which of those are the most important so that we can weight each of those criteria. Along with that will be some sort of explanatory documents to help folks understand what is meant by each of the criteria and how we're intending to apply them. So, you know, sort of leaving you halfway through this at this point, but I just really wanted to give you a heads up on where things are headed this summer and what we'll be working on. And maybe we could just take a couple minutes to take any questions, and otherwise we'll let people go.
Dave, you hear me okay? This is Bob Landman.
Yes, Bob.
Yeah, the one thing you left out, the thing that my favorite, telecommuting. It's a major thing now because of the virus. And there's a woman, her name is Carol Miller, and she is the advocate of broadband technology. This state has got a real problem now because we need telecommuting and we don't have the communications. We have DSL, Consolidated is trying to cover everybody. But I think Carol Miller should be talked to. She's the governor has hired her. She's up there. I know her personally. She's doing a good job, but there's a lot of the state that isn't covered.
Yeah, I'll say, Bob, the big issue I think here is that I don't believe that we would be able to fund a broadband project via the 10-year plan.
Maybe not funded, but maybe some kind of connection with intelligence to the. I mean, put the lever on the state to say you got to lean. You, the POC, got to put the hammer on the communications companies to provide. Verizon here in Northampton is 3G, not 4G. They're talking about going a 5G as if it's the answer. I wrote an editorial. 5G won't even work. It won't go through a piece of 5G, by the way, at the right frequency, won't even go through a piece of paper. It's 24 gigahertz. You can't go through walls. It's a joke. But anyway, we should have something there to put the state of the state, you know, hey, you got to do more than just look at roads.
Right. Oh, yeah, I agree. But that being said, and you know, we certainly do that for our long range plan. We look well beyond the roads.
Yeah. Okay.
That being said, it is, you know, for better or worse, the 10-year plan is a highway project document. And so those are the types of projects we are able to get some bike pedestrian projects in there. Occasionally we can get a transit project put in there as well beyond the existing allocations. But, you know, something like broadband, I think would be really challenging to fund a transportation project that way. That being said, I think our long range plan, our congestion management process, you know, are all going to point towards we need to start looking at other solutions other than just widening the road.
Yeah, it is a highway. It is an information highway.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's been proven this spring how critical it is. So,
yep.
You know, how we address it exactly, I think is still a little bit up for debate. But, you know, it's something we clearly need to be orienting ourselves towards.
Maybe by the 22nd century.
Yeah. Any other quick thoughts or comments?
When you're through, David, would you be kind enough to send us those slides?
Absolutely. I can send out, you know, this is only about half the slides of the presentation. But I'm willing to send it out if anybody has any questions about anything that I didn't go over or anything I did go over, absolutely feel free to reach out to me, email or call. We also had a project updates on the agenda. Scott and I pulled together a memo as how we used to do it when we had the in-person meetings. And I'll send that out via email along with the slides from today's presentations, so that folks can view that and look at. It's just a quick paragraph about I don't know, half a dozen or 8 different ongoing projects in the region that Scott or I are involved in, or to some degree, or Christian maybe in some cases, and just sort of quick updates on where the status is on some of those things. So we'll get that out to you today.
No rush, no rush. Anything on project updates, David? Or do you want to have Scott take that one?
Well, I think we'll just do that. We'll send out the memo on that, and rather than, I mean, we're already after 11, so I don't want to abuse people's time too
I don't
much.
see anybody jumping up to leave.
At least we don't have people giving us a ticket for being late parking.
We don't have to leave. We've already arrived.
Yeah.
I'm leaving too.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm alone.
Coffee cups 10 steps away and the bathroom's 11, and you know.
Booze is a lot closer.
I'm due.
But yeah, I do have to move on to other things, so I am going to sign out. Thank you for everyone.
Tiebreaker.
All right.
All right. Thanks.
Do I hear a motion?
I'll second.
Chris made it and seconded.
Yeah.
Thanks, folks.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks a lot. We'll talk to everybody soon.
Nice job, Scott.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.